Welcome back to Junk, an art therapy podcast. I'm Josée, also JJ, here with my pals and fellow art therapists, Christy and Nat. Our theme this week was a bit more of an introduction to art therapy through what I'm going to call art therapy in action. At the close of our last week, I offered an invitation to our trio here to create art that represents or symbolizes you as an art therapist. But to keep with where we often like to start in sessions, I thought we could start today off with a check-in to ground ourselves into our episode today. So I'm going to ask you both, and myself, I guess, I'm important too, if you could be a color today, what color would you be?
I'm always the same color.
Christy's signature blue, perchance?
It's teal. It's
There
teal.
we go.
It's a mix of blue and green. And I suppose I like to move across depending on my mood. Before we started, I was like, I'm definitely like a dark teal now. But now that we're here, I'm so excited. I'm like, I'm definitely a full saturation, borderline cyan kind of color. Yeah.
Neon in your face almost, like real bright. Yeah. Nat, what about you?
Oh, I always, whenever anyone asks me this question, which in art therapy, actually happens quite a lot, I always have like a bright rainbow color. But today I'm feeling very like a little bit tender, had quite a morning before I got together with you guys. I'm really glad to be here. So I'm feeling kind of like pale pink, kind of like underbelly pale pink today. Yeah.
Underbelly. I like that.
We'll see if that changes over the time we're here together.
Yeah, for sure. For me, I am feeling like an icy blue, like that blue, dark gray. It almost looks more gray, but when you look at it real close, there's blue in it that the river color gets when it freezes. It is cold here today. As you can tell by my outfit, I had to grab an extra sweater before we started because I'm freezing my butt off even after turning up the temperature. So I can't seem to get my brain out of the coldness, but there's something about that coldness that's very crisp and refreshing, even though it's cold and I don't want to be in it for very long. I still appreciate it. So yeah. I always like check-ins like that because there's so much that they can offer in context for where someone's at in the moment. Like Nat's soft underbelly, Christy changing variations now that she realizes how excited she is. So we can get down into our meat of our episode today. So in art therapy, we often talk about the process. And what this means is in the act of creating something, whether that be drawing, painting, sculpting, or any other form of art you can think of, not only focusing on the final product, but rather focusing on what happens while you're making it. It's about expressing yourself, exploring your feelings, and sometimes discovering things about yourself that, words just can't quite capture. And the focus is on what you're experiencing as you create, whatever that may be, and how that experience helps you process emotions, reduce stress, or gain insight into yourself. So in saying this, we're going to touch back to our invitation from the last episode. And before we actually get into talking about the art we made over our break, I'm very curious. How was the art making process for you?
I have to look at my art to try to remember the process.
Paper, scissors.
Yeah. I'm just jumping in, Christy. You're looking at me with those deep penetrating eyes. Okay. I've got my art here. So I'm kind of trying to remember, looking at it myself and then trying to remember what that was like. I made it a couple of days ago. Yeah, I really liked this art invitation and it's really kind of wide open. And so for me, it took a little while to get started. Like I just kind of needed to sit with it. So this took me a couple of days actually. And much of that time was just me kind of contemplating the invitation. The invitation being an image or a piece of art representing what kind of art therapist you are or want to be. And I have to say, I started off kind of a heady, lots of words. And so I ended up writing all those down first. So there weren't really any images or color. And then I started putting the whole piece together and felt really drawn to making it super clear. Like I wanted to clarify what I was, all those words, like what distilled down to the essence. Like, what do I really want to say? What's maybe a metaphor or a picture that would help tell that story. So I kind of went on this long process. And in the end, I didn't end up using the materials I thought I was going to use, which was kind of a surprise. I ended up having time when I was in a different place with a bunch of pens and some pencil crayons that I borrowed. So that the piece itself turned out completely different than I had been building in my mind's eye. But it ended up being kind of a more simple image, I guess, in some ways. And therefore, that kind of clarity came through. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It did take me many days to do it, but in little spurts.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Nat. What about you, Christy? How did it feel to work with this invitation?
Yeah, I feel like there's some similarities between what I'm hearing with Nat and myself in that I did feel like I needed to sit with it for a little bit and think about it. However, that is a dangerous place for me to get into because I love to plan. I love to think. So I started looking into some of my favorite existential writers. I started really thinking about who am I? And, my existential crisis started to begin and I really started to put it off. And so then last night I was sitting and watching the episode that we did last week and quickly sketched something and then ended up just following my creative process into creating something. It started out really kind of heady and really like, oh, these are the sort of symbols that I want to include. And then, started to become a little bit more of what my process is. This is definitely a spot right in between art and art therapy. What I ended up creating was very much my process as an artist, which often because of time restraints, Josée, you were like, you don't have any time restraints. Most dangerous thing meant that I spent a lot more time than I would normally in an art therapy session where we create the art often within like the hour or half hour that we have. I wouldn't say it's complete, but as an art therapist, I definitely feel like I am still in process. So maybe that makes sense too.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. For me, I ended up working on it twice with 2 different sets of materials, which felt kind of good. One that's wearable, which I'm really excited about. I love that because I'm like, oh, this feels like a beacon, like an invitation to others. And I really love that. And then the other one started kind of similar to Nat's, where it started more with the words, but my words were, I was just flipping through my giant stack of magazines and just picking out words that felt related to how I like to practice. And so those kind of grounded it at the beginning, and then it just kind of built from there. And it's all kind of underlying one image that really struck me that became the core of my little piece. And I really wanted to work really small with that. So I picked a really tiny canvas, which I thought was interesting too, because I didn't know why I was so drawn to the small canvas, but I love it. I love it small. And I feel like it needed to be small. I feel like if it was big, it wouldn't have really suited how I see myself as an art therapist. So yeah, I really appreciated that being a little unexpected for me for sure. So we can talk about the actual art now, because I'm very curious, as I'm sure everyone is, as to what was created by our junk crew here. So is there anybody who would like to share first? I don't know who you're pointing at, Nat, because it just looks like you're pointing back at the computer. I'm so confused by that pointing.
Nat is saying, I am not going first.
I'm not going first.
That's what she's saying. So I guess it's between you and me, Josée.
I can go first. So I'll share a picture of my art. First and foremost, I was running an open studio last week and we were making pins. So I created 2 pins that were practice pins because I always reacquaint myself with the pin press before I get started because I inevitably always mess it up and do one upside down. So my We Dream a Little More About the World with Hope is upside down. So that was my faulty one. And then How Does Your Garden Grow was my right side up, and I got it figured out. But as far as the pins go, I'll describe what they look like for the listeners. So my first pin has a blue background with white daisies on it. And then it's got all different words cut out from magazines and greeting cards that say, we dream a little more about the world with hope. And then my second one is a picture of a field of flowers. And then there's also some pictures at the bottom of tulips and another, oh, that looks like peonies, and a bursting peony flower. And then in the middle, it says, "How does your garden grow?" And then so creating those felt really good. I'm really excited to put those on my apron that I tend to wear when I'm practicing art therapy. And then at home, I kind of grounded into the invitation a little bit more directly. And I picked a small, oh God, I'm the worst with measurements, but Christy, you would know what the regular size is for the small canvases, I would assume, like 4" by 4".
Somewhere
Something
around
like
there.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so I had picked out all these words first, and the words that are on here say anxious feelings, serious issues, even the hardest of hearts can be taught how to melt. I fall down. It makes me so angry. Reduce loneliness. And he liked that he wasn't judged. And then I had found a texture that I really liked on a different picture while flipping through the magazines, and I cut all around the texture to make it a background. And then the image that stuck with me that felt really, that I kept going back to, is two cartoons. And one person's got their hands right down there in the mud, and then the other person is off to the side, crouching beside them. I kept the heads out of the picture because I wanted you to be able to use your imagination as to what the conversation might be, what these individuals might look like. But I really loved the metaphor of someone being alongside, getting down in the mud. So that's where mine came from. I can definitely say that I'm sure, even from just the verbal description, many of you can pick up on some themes that are present there. But yeah, that's the art that I've created for now.
I also, the motif of the mud just caught my attention there.
You know what? As soon as I finished it, I was like, oh, I know one person that's really going to vibe with this piece.
For sure. And that was me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this image is what I created yesterday. It's like an 8.5 by 11 piece of watercolor paper because that's where I was headed in the first place. But in the end, I had a lot of paint pens on hand and they were super fine. So I ended up drawing this image where in the background, what I see are like these sort of plants that are growing in the green out of some brown sort of soil and then out from the dark down deep. They're kind of coming up, and overlaid is a hand. It's actually a tracing of my own left hand, offering this sort of rainbow of thoughts, intentions, values, strengths. I kind of tried to capture the essence in white on the outside. It says, "Welcome all, diversity is life." And then the other talks about compassion and warmth, equaling response able. And I love that word responsibility, but I'm always kind of breaking it apart. For me, it's more like able to respond, meaning to be touched and to touch others and to connect. And in this case, across diversity. So that was sort of the theme that kind of emerged. But I loved how this hand seems to be, it's upside down because of the orientation, but it's like maybe it's offering, it's in a kind of more of an offering position rather than a receiving. There's just like a multitude, a rainbow of colors, a cornucopia of offerings depending sort of on the ready. And I loved how you talked about wearable art, JJ, because I couldn't help but think I want a pair of mittens like this or gloves, because that might help me remember. Alongside means something different to every person in every occasion, right? And so what we have to offer is ourselves, but in support as art therapists, but we, what that might mean might be different on any given day. And it's interesting that we actually started with, what color are you as art? Because sometimes, it feels like the essence of that is here as well. Some of the words that are on there are, "I see you with unconditional positive regard. We heal together like dancing and music. You belong with your first breath. Care and attention equal art, equal love." And a lot of these words are like they're very foundational for me. I feel like they're words that I've received from great teachers, some in person, some in books, some in lived experiences, some of the clients I've met, some people in my family. And so that's what I bring with me in this left hand that I have to offer. So again, back to the process is what I'm noticing is that I was thinking about this a lot. I think I said that earlier. And because I filled in all of these backgrounds with a very fine pen, it gave me a lot of time to sit there with a very fine black pen and fill in all of that detail. And then to sit there with the green background and to really sit with the concept. And so I found the process very relaxing and very complete, I think, by the time it was done. Yeah. The garden metaphor is definitely my jam.
Also, oh my God, I'm adding rainbow mittens to my like gift to Natalie side box because they would be so perfect and so cute. I need to learn to knit.
Yeah, me too. But you know what? That's okay. I'm always looking for ways to challenge myself artistically where I already know what I want it to feel like when it's done, and then experimenting with making that happen. So maybe I will. We'll see.
That's incredible. I appreciate that share so much, Nat. Thank you so much. Christy, what about you? Do you have art to share with us today?
Okay, yes. Phenomenological description. Okay, let's try.
Little blue monster, little blue monster. Sorry.
My image is a mix of both hand-drawn and digital. And I'm going to maybe share some of the process as well after I give a description of what it looks like. The background of the image is white. And then there is a frame within that frame. And the frame that I've created is supposed to kind of look like an old school Mac file. So we have the little dots in the top left-hand corner and the file name across the top, which is final 01-V06-03_redo.psd, which is a bit of a nod to my background in doing design work. My titles, it would be nice if I gave them a name that I stuck with, but they always end up a little bit of a mess as I go through. But again, it speaks to this idea of thinking that you're done and still being in process. Within the document window, I have a picture. There is a central figure. The background is blue. Within the background, there is a landscape with mountains and hills. It's kind of in like a cartoony style. The character in the front, the head has been replaced with a hand mirror, or I hope it looks like a hand mirror, but it still has my signature hairstyle of the top bun above the mirror. And on the mirror, there is a nose in the center, but there are no eyes or ears, just the mirror with the nose in the center. The figure is holding, their hands are shoulder height. And in the left hand, there is a skull. In the right hand, there are some drawing instruments, a piece of willow charcoal, a pencil, an Apple pencil, and a paintbrush. On the shoulders of the character, there is a statue of a woman. It kind of looks like maybe a fertility figure or an old statue. On the other one is the blue monster that we talked about last week. Above the character, there is, on the right and left-hand side, there is a devil and an angel. There's stars in the sky. Below the angel, there is a butterfly and some leaves. Below the devil, there is a hourglass with a limnoscape or an infinity symbol above it. The character is wearing a bluish cardigan that is covered in a pattern of dogs. And there is a tiny ladder in the bottom right-hand corner that is going up into the frame.
Awesome. I think you win phenomenological description for sure.
I really like working both by hand and digitally. And when I started this piece, we'll see if it'll come up. I was watching our YouTube podcast, our first one, and I did a really quick sketch. And I really liked this sketch. It's just in my notebook in pen. I took this picture, put it in my computer, recolored it in blue, and then drew over it in pencil. I did an ink version of it over top. I took the lines into the computer. I cleaned up those lines. I actually watched a YouTube video and learned a little bit more about cleaning up my lines. So I learned something new too. And then I colored it. This is where I was like, Christy, you only have a couple of hours before you have to be filming the next one. You don't have time to make this completely 3D. And that's where we ended up. Really cool process. Some symbols in there that often appear in my work with existentialism. There's a lot of thinking about life and death and the balance, the paradox, the having both good and evil. The mirror is that idea of reflecting back, as well as I hope in getting to know a little bit about my experience with art and how I embody as an artist, I'm hoping that others that work with me can have that reflected in themselves and can maybe like magnify that so that they too feel like they can take some of these tools and make something with all of the symbols and the absurdness and the depth that they would like to create something that they're really proud of. So I'm really happy about how this piece turned out. Thank you so much for letting me share it. It was really quite lovely to work on. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Christy. The beauty of art created in art therapy too is you can always go back to it. There's no it's done if you don't want it to be. I'm really glad to hear that it sounded like everybody got something out of the process. I know I did. In regards to it, though, I'm very curious because I've been sitting here thinking about it the whole time, but I'm wondering if you've noticed any overlapping themes that seem relevant or are just tickling at the back of your brain to be shared.
There's a lot of color in what we all created, I thought.
Definitely. And I even noticed how, like, again, the Christie signature blue was apparent in all three also. It was very consistent in my background color of my little canvas piece.
We each had a nature metaphor and or symbol. Either it was the backdrop or it was really prominent, but they were all there.
And I think something else that I picked up on too is that none of these pieces existed as a silo of solitude. They are all in relation to some extent, which of course, like being an art therapist, you can't operate as an art therapist, I would argue, as a sole entity. You have to work with and alongside others. So I think that that was really apparent, the relation in between the role and the people behind the role.
The other thing I couldn't help but notice is that we all pulled into a certain degree. We didn't, and nobody created a figure completely from the top down or from a distance in a whole. You know, it was more like parts of cells, parts of a figure, you know, part of a body. And I often think about how art therapy is like making space to be with a particular part of your life, a particular part of your personality, a particular part of something that needs to looking at specifically. So it can be very intimate and very close in, and something about all of the art we shared had that closeness.
I also think each of the art pieces we saw today had a really great way of bringing all the little pieces together in one cohesive way. Each piece talked about so many different aspects, but they all fit together. Nothing felt like it didn't belong, or nothing felt like it was like, oh, what was that doing there? Everything felt part of it, but there were so many little pieces that were important and meant to be there. If you had to give your art from this invitation a title, Christy, would it keep the title that's in the top bar, or would it get a different title? Because I feel that one. When I do photo edits, it's always like draft 3, version 5. Like, yeah, always edit, copy of edit. Yeah.
One of the things I was really thinking about as I was working on this piece was that it's where I feel I'm at, like in this moment today. But if you asked me to create a piece, you know, next week or tomorrow, or 3 years from now, I know it would be different. It wouldn't be the same one. You know, it is the kind of like an inside joke with my fellow technology creative beings that this is what our file names end up being, because we don't know exactly where we are, and we are going to change in a moment, and we are going to write a new draft, and maybe we'll start with a completely different title next week, but we don't know. This is what it is right now, and this could be the final one, but who knows? So I think I'd keep the same title.
Love that. Constant reinvention. Totally. Nat, what about you? Does yours have a title that's hiding in there?
For now, for today, I think I would say attending. I was working with attention and to tend, you know, the garden. So it's more attending. Yeah, that's what came to mind this time. And just to say, I couldn't help while you were speaking, Christy, just imagining like old style animation where you'd have like actual film, and each cell would like slowly move. And if you were just to clip one cell in a larger story, you would just get that motion in that moment of time. And I often think that that's the kind of art we're making in art therapy. It's like one cell over time, just in this moment. And like you said, it could be related to the other ones, or the scene could be just changing right afterwards. Yeah. But interesting to see us all spend more time, or have the invitation to take one moment in time and put some more color and some more layers and some more time into it. I really enjoyed that part.
I think if my canvas had a title, it would be In the Mud. My favorite place to be. Absolutely, without a doubt. I don't know if I have a title for my pins, like my wearable art, other than just like maybe my art therapy practice name and Bloom and Blossom, because I feel like they both build to that. But yeah, definitely the canvas piece has a title. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed that process and got something out of it. I thought for a transition, we could definitely discuss invitations in general. So we as art therapists are often bouncing ideas off of each other, constantly in research for different invitations to work with, because they're as you can tell, even from the little toe, maybe even just like a whiff of moisture from the lake that you've gotten so far of art therapy through these 1.5 podcasts so far. It's something that is pretty integral to the process for us as art therapists. As much as spontaneous art can tell us a lot, and we work with a lot too, invitations can be really useful. I find, especially for group art therapy, as it kind of keeps us focused on a similar topic. Overall, I'm really curious if either of you have some favorites for specific populations or demographics that you have worked with as far as invitations go. Like, is there one that you tend to always go to? One of my absolute favorites, and if anyone, I like how I'm saying this, it makes me feel like the most imposter syndrome rising out of me. But if anyone's read my thesis, one of my favorite invitations is making ugly art, because it's a great starting point. For me, it kind of brings the expectation down for people who are curious and cautious about entering a space that's defined as an art therapy space, especially because it kind of brings some joy and lightheartedness into, at least it has every time I've offered it, into the space, in that people at first have to really confront that perfectionism or that drive to perform or that drive to make something perfect, and then do the exact opposite. So that's one of my favorites. And I've worked on that one with pretty much every population. I'm sure that I could, if I sat and thought about it, that there would be some populations I probably wouldn't offer it with right off the bat, but it is a useful tool for a lot of like not super deep therapeutic intervention right off the hop. So yeah, it's a great invitation to work with starting off. So do either of you have any that you'd like to share?
I wanted to say that working with seniors in long-term care, one of the things that just happened that I discovered upon was that working with collage materials, so cutouts from magazines, words, but mostly images, turned out to be the art invitation that I went to every single time, every single week that I spend time there. Mostly because a hospital environment is not necessarily the most stimulating. And this was a way to bring the outside world in a way that if someone can see, if they have the visual acuity to look at those materials, is suddenly can transport anyone, into another place in time, or if someone has different kind of cognitive abilities now around sort of generating and remembering and short and long-term memory, it would just be it would be in the present moment. We could visit whatever was on the page and have maybe some associative thinking, if not around the subject matter, the color. So I just wanted to say that working with seniors and using collage material turned out to be more like story and narrative therapy. Just the stories would just pour out as they were invited by each image. And sometimes we cut them out and we assembled them somewhere and kept them. But most often we just went through the pile of pictures and had, a real in the moment recollection and or dreaming or storytelling. And some of the stories were true and some of the stories were just more interesting than true. My grandfather used to say, never let a lie get in the way of a good story. So yeah, I would always take collage material with me when I was meeting someone for the first time and I just don't know much about them. If I didn't really know their comfort level with art material for any reason, just having pictures available on a variety of mediums and subjects and content, and just see what happens as a kind of a I've used it mostly with seniors in that example, but I would say with almost any population, a starting place.
Mm-hmm. I love working with collage. I find that it's an easy way for me to work bottom up because I don't know where it's going to take me. And I always like that. That's actually what ended up happening with my canvas piece from this week. But yeah, I love collage.
What I really love about collage is if you're working with like a group, if it's something you bring back multiple weeks, which often when I was working with seniors, often it would be something that they were so engaged in it that we do it a couple of times. You'd get to know what people liked in terms of images. And so some people would be like really into specific things. So to show up and to have like, and when we were in school, it would be like, oh, I need dogs. Like, can everyone make me a big pile of dogs? Because I need dogs. To show up and to bring a bunch of images just for the people there or have different ones for different individuals, it was such a good way to build a connection, to make people feel like I was actually thinking about them, which I was in between sessions. It was like I would be like, oh, this person really likes maps. This person really likes dogs. This one really likes babies. I'm going to make sure that I have all of these things so that I can show them, so that I can put them out, so that they can, so that they know that we're connecting, and that this is like our special time together. So I wanted to say that. And then I do want to say my favorite invitation. Oh man, I have so many.
I know it's an impossible question, so you don't have to pick just one. But I was just anticipating with how long every once in a while we'd have those silences of us thinking. I was like, first one in your head, just say it out loud.
Okay, well, I have two. The first one is I really do love create self as tree or tree of strength. I love that one because it's an organic shape. Most people can draw a tree, and then you can really get people thinking into the metaphor. That invitation is offered in different ways, where it's sometimes a little bit more in depth. Nat is the one who gave me one where it's like it goes really into what could be on the top of the tree and what could be in the roots, or to let them draw it and then be like, to notice and be like, oh, I've drawn myself without very deep roots, and what does that mean? Or I've drawn my branches they're super full of leaves and full of animals, and like, oh, isn't that like interesting? And it's like a way to start to be like, well, what does that mean to me if I've created something that has these things? Or I created myself in like a winter environment where everything is bare, and maybe we're waiting for that moment when spring hits. Like, it just really gets you into the metaphor, as well as being something that is reasonably easy to draw, so to take that pressure off. So I think if I was to walk in and to not have something, I think collage is a really good one, because it is, you don't need to draw, you don't need to stick anything down, you can just look through the images. But if I was to come in and want to be creating some art, I'd bring in some bright different materials, all sorts of different materials, definitely some bright materials, lay them out and say, create yourself as a tree. Or if I wanted to keep the metaphor a little bit more surface, I would say, create your tree of strength.
What about the second one?
Okay. The second one is just because you know how much I love getting personal. This is one that I did recently when I was struggling a little bit, that I found really, really, really helped me. And it's one that can be done in a couple of different ways, but especially if you're like, this is maybe really great for if we're doing art as therapy and we need something to bring us out of a situation. So I had a situation in my life that I was really catastrophizing on. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was just always thinking of worst case scenario. And what I did is I sat down, and what you can do is you can do both. You can say, draw the worst case scenario and draw the best case scenario. Now, I had already done a lot of dwelling on the worst case scenario. So I said, draw the best case scenario. And for me, I couldn't get there. My brain was so stuck in negativity that I could not get there. So what I had to do is I had to be ridiculous. So I went, best case scenario would have to include a pet unicorn Pegasus that I can fly around on, and there would be rainbows everywhere and world peace. And I ended up just creating this, hyper positive picture that my negative self, when I started it, was like, oh, this is dumb and whatever, and I can't even. But when I let myself get to that completely ridiculous, okay, I'm going to force myself to think about what would be the most ridiculous positive thing that could happen, outlandish positive thing. And I created this, living in a castle, meeting my prince and, lots of other princes to hang out with, just like totally ridiculous. And yeah, it just got me out of the place that I was stuck in. So that, I don't know, maybe not nicely as worded one, but that would be an invitation that for myself, I will go back to when I find myself in a situation where I'm stewing around something in my brain and I'm imagining the worst case scenario. I'm going to be like, Christy, sit down and draw the most ridiculous positive outcome that you can. Even if you can't believe it right now, freaking draw it and just see what happens.
I'm so glad you shared that. Like, I'm positively tickled. I love it. Such a good reframe. And I also wanted to touch, because you had spoken about self-esteem, which is one that I offer a lot too. For me, the reason I like digging into that one so much is because the metaphors speak so loudly in self-esteem. And another invitation that I was taught that's a similar offering is by Elena Darowich, and it's bridge path drawing. And so you invite participants to draw a bridge from somewhere to somewhere, and that's it. And then we go walk through it together on like the different orientation, the different style of bridge, if the bridge is actually connecting to anything. There's so much to be offered from invitations like that give us all these tools to kind of think into metaphor. And I've also found that those ones, self-esteem, bridge path drawing, are very good intro activities still too, because it kind of shows participants a way through a metaphor also without being like interpretive, because you do it together. So that's another invitation that I really love working with people who might be newer to art therapy, also people who are not new to art therapy, because I have done self-esteem like 40 times and they are all different. I have 2 different versions on my fridge right now. And I'm pretty sure there's 3 different versions in my box downstairs. And there's one on my desk at the office as well. So clearly self-esteem is a big metaphor, but they're always different. And they always give me insight into like a moment in time. And I can look back on them now and be like, oh my God, I remember exactly where I was with that because I walked through each part of what was there. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that one up. I have a least favorite. And I've been working really hard on finding the places where it's appropriate and useful. And I have found some, but I still struggle with it. And my least favorite invitation is scribble drawings because they give me a lot of anxiety and I have a really hard time finding things in them. But I've been trying to I feel like a very similar attitude to you, Christy, where I've gotten to the point where I'm just like, I'm working myself up over something that is not worth working myself up over. What is the most ridiculous thing I can create out of what I'm staring at right now that just feels scrambled like my brain? And so I've kind of leaned into it and created things that way, like ice cream cones and snails on race cars and things like that. Like nothing ever ends up feeling like it's prophetically profound by any means or anything like that. But that would have to be like, just from my own personal experience, my least favorite invitation, but I still use it and know that there's a place for it. Do either of you have an invitation that you hear and your body goes, oh, no, please no? Or is it just me?
With squiggle drawings, you draw a squiggle. So you take and you make like a big continuous mark, or what you want to do is you just want to make a big kind of mess of lines, and then you look within them and you try to find like a shape of something, or something that stands out to you, and then you start to make it into something else. So that's the one that JJ said that she does not like. And it's definitely one that when I'm like, I don't know what to draw, I'll just do a squiggle and then I'll find something. It's definitely, we are opposites just a little bit most of the time.
Most of the time. But that's okay.
But I was going to say the one that I was going to say that I don't like is I don't like scribble tag, which is different.
That's awful.
Do you want to explain it, Nat?
Oh gosh, no, I don't even. I just think we should all forget about it and art therapy will grow.
With scribble tag, it's one that's kind of interactive where usually the art therapist and the participant are both on a piece of paper together, and one person is drawing and the other person tries to like catch their marker with their marker. So it's kind of like playing tag with your drawing devices. I never liked tag as a kid. So like, I don't like tag, period. It's not my favorite. There's levels to it. You can start doing like a safe area, which like, I like the idea of doing a safe area, like draw a safe place. Love that. When we add this, like that there's someone that's going to chase you, not my favorite. Yeah. So good. I'm glad we're in agreement. Nat, do you have another one that you don't like, or is that's the one?
That's the one I just don't use, that we learned a lot about. And I wouldn't use it as a parent with my own children. I know that they wouldn't have enjoyed that. So yeah, definitely not that one. I was thinking a little bit how, when it comes to the squiggle, I still use that, but having gone to art therapy school with you, Josée, and having been partnered with you through your squiggle experiences, I have to say I've just moved on to something that you've probably heard, like neurographic art. But essentially it's just, again, using one hand or two hands and kind of making shapes and squiggles. And just, sometimes I'll give the direction to sort of fill the page until you feel done. And then the opportunity to color in the cells. And for me, like it's kind of like the difference between doing a maze and using a labyrinth. A maze is like all doors and opens and goes. It's like your decision making. It's very left brain, right? You're kind of trying to find your way, where the labyrinth is more it's very relaxing because there's only one way to go. You kind of go all the way, very satiating to meet the center. You always get there, and then you unwind back out. And something about coloring the cells in succession with whatever color feels good to you has a kind of a completely different feel for many folks. It just seems to be very, very relaxing and reminiscent of something. Coloring within the lines might be something that someone else has experienced, since childhood, and just really, really gentle. And so it looks the same, but actually a completely different outcome. So I do work with the scribble because I think everyone can move a writing implement in any direction and get the sense of what that might feel like. But then I typically don't turn it into a game. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So we've got some favorites, we've got some least favorites, we've got some disagreement on what's what, but that's the beauty of different practitioners and approaches and different feelings and different humans. We all like different things and we all struggle with different things, and different things come up for us through different mediums. So I'm glad we had the chance to talk about that and give you a little bit more of an insight into what an art therapy process can look like and the importance of invitations, dear listener. We should start talking about looking ahead to next week's episode. I know, Nat, you're going to be hosting next week. So is there anything for us or the listener to expect?
I'm really imagining we're sort of starting at the beginning. What is art therapy? What is a invitation or working with art in an art therapy way look like? And then I guess I was thinking about talking about open studio. Open studio is a term that's often used in art therapy that talks about a kind of group art therapy rather than just as an individual, that's done in a very casual kind of setting. And I'm wondering if you guys would like to participate with me in an online open studio and have that experience. And we can maybe reflect on that together and then come back together and share what that experience was like with our listeners? What do you think?
I'm on board. I work with Open Studio a lot, so I always think it's so good. And it'll be so nice to be able to refer back to our podcast and be like, if you want to know what else we do in a different way, check out the podcast. But no, I'm definitely on board. Open Studio is a great foot in the door for creativity, creative expression, lots of things. So I think that could work super well. What about you, Christy?
Oh, I love Open Studio. They can be really wonderful for just developing a community, for being around other artists as they create and creating together in a different way. So yeah, I'm really excited.
I figured this one would be juicy because all three of us have participated in a number of different styles, and we've also started offering them ourselves. I'll read what I wrote here because I kind of prepared a little bit of a spiel about Open Studio, but I kind of wanted to also hear what just came up when I asked you guys about participating. So in the world of art therapy, the term Open Studio typically refers to a type of group art therapy in which little or no art making invitations or instructions are given. A group of participants are welcomed by an art therapist into an accessible space and provided with time and materials to create whatever art or craft they spontaneously choose inside a facilitated community setting. So it's a group. Here, time and space for creative expression is a type of mental health break. Making things can be a type of therapy, and sometimes we call this art as therapy. I was thinking that maybe you said what kind of art Open Studio might not offer, and you've heard me talk about how I admire the author and practitioner named Pat Allen. And I was hoping to offer her step-by-step method as our art invitation. So she doesn't typically give invitations, but she has a method to approach art making. And so I thought maybe we could try that for an hour or so and then reflect back on how the experience was for each of us, share our art, and see how that might differ to what happened today, where we were given an art invitation, we went away individually, we spent very, immersed in our own process and came back and shared. Let's see if it's different.
So on board. Aye, Captain. We're here, ready to go. And I'm excited. It's always great sharing authors and little tidbits of the people that influence us and our practice. So I'm definitely on board. This week, especially given our topic, we thought we would invite our listeners to engage in a gentle invitation to create art alongside us. So we'd mentioned this in the last podcast briefly, that we will probably offer 0.5 episodes of short invitations. So since it's the start of a new year, we're just rolling into 2025, which can be a particularly daunting experience for some. I wanted to offer an invitation to create an encouraging hand. So watch out for episode 2.5 to get the full details on that. And as always, we would love to receive anything you feel comfortable with sharing. And there's absolutely no obligation to do so as well. You can just be a silent listener alongside. We hope that you gain something from the process regardless. And we will include the short in-betweener episode just after this. So watch out for it as episode 2.5. And folks, friends, that's a wrap for this episode number 2. We hope you managed to gain a little bit more familiarity with what art therapy can look like and how it might unfold. As always, if you have any questions, we are totally open to receiving them, and you can email us at junkarttherapy@gmail.com or comment if that option is available to you on your chosen platform. I am one of your 3 stellar co-hosts, JJ, also known as Josée.
I'm Nat.
I'm Christy.
And don't forget, sometimes the best treasures are disguised as junk. And we hope to see you next week for episode 3. Thanks, everybody.